I don't know whether or not we enjoy being in this sort of bubble of paranoia and fear and sort of weird conspiracy that makes up the online world. It's obviously a personal racket for most of us. We gain something from it. I don't know why. Maybe it's a sense of identity. Maybe it's a kind of safety valve or a pressure relief from some of your own anxiety. So you can kind of blame it on something else, or, it's basically making order out of chaos, a lot of it. A lot of these sort of clickbait titles these days are things like, the world is broken, Britain is broken, Armageddon is coming, AI will destroy all jobs within 2 years. I mean, that's just the kind of noise of it. It reminded me of a friend of mine called Dave, who was what he called himself a pocket adventurer. And what that meant was that he would go on these kind of expeditions, solo expeditions. He's quite an old guy, 40s and then 50s. And he would go to places like Bolivia or Peru or Paraguay. He went to Cambodia, Sri Lanka, regularly went to Vietnam. And he got off the beat. He was well off the beaten track when he was doing these things. And he was on his own, quite a portly bloke, kind of chain-smoking guy. And I just thought, bloody hell, I mean, it sounds absolutely terrifying. But, he did these things. Now, I don't know whether or not he was himself or had trepidation about these solo expeditions, sort of into the unknown, and whether he just pushed through it and was just kind of a bit more courageous than I, or whether or not he somehow didn't feel the same kind of anxieties and paranoias that other people might do about that kind of thing. But he did it for 30 years. Unfortunately he's died now, but died of cancer. But he wasn't. He got through them all. There was probably less to be worried about than perhaps someone like me would think. But he did tell me one story, which was that he was in, I think, Cambodia, and he was kind of in the jungles there, and he was in a strange place. I don't know, I don't know the details, but he ended up sort of coming into contact with a few Cambodian soldiers, and they were, I don't know, I think they had to walk through somewhere where there was a kind of guard post. Anyway, it was very late at night, and they encouraged him to come in to their little hut. And there were, I think, 3 or 4 of them and him. And, they were kind of waving their machine guns and pistols around, and, not in a threatening manner, and they began to get very, very drunk. And all 4 of them got extremely drunk. And Dave said to me that he... while this was going on, he started to sort of feel, what should we say? I mean, I wouldn't say frightened, but he began to get just mildly paranoid that, he might end up dead. But he survived the night, and everything was okay. But he did realise afterwards, that it had been a kind of pretty tricky situation. It wouldn't have taken much, he said, for something to happen. As these soldiers got increasingly drunk, and I mean, they weren't in any battalion, they were just in the middle of nowhere. I don't know what they were doing. I said to him, he told me about these adventures he'd had before, but I remember saying to him, Dave, it sounds absolutely terrifying. Really terrifying. He said, well, it was a hell of an experience. That's true. He said to me, some things are worth dying for. And I knew exactly what he meant when he said that. He wasn't saying that it was worth dying just because he was in the, in the wrong place at the wrong time and a drunk soldier shot him in the head. He wasn't saying it was worth it for that, but he was saying that it's worth dying not to live a half life, to live a full life. And for Dave to live a full life, that meant, he wanted to do these things. He didn't have a partner. He was on his own, and this was his This was his relationship with himself and the world, going out on these solo expeditions. I mean, they're only kind of short, 3 weeks here, 3 weeks there, but nevertheless, for him, it was being alive, and he didn't want to live a half life, not like me. He didn't want to live like me, sort of scared to go out your front door. He wanted to do these things, and he realised that from time to time there were dangers, there was risk, but he still did it. And as I said, he said, look, some things are worth dying for. And he's saying it's better not to be afraid of severe consequences, but to accept that this is the price you pay for a full life. Anyway, so it got me thinking, really, because what else is worth dying for? Well, one of the things that's going on at the moment is there all this fear and paranoia it's mainly in the online world. I mean, it's seeping out, it's creeping under doors and into the real world, but generally it hasn't taken over. It's just being used as a political tool, the sort of ridiculous posturing that's going on at the moment, playing into it. I mean, the worst cases are people like Steve Bannon and JD Vance, who are making these kind of ridiculous online statements suggesting that America is at civil war. I mean, and Elon Musk as well, saying people of the left are murderers. I mean, it's very peculiar. JD Vance saying that statistically it's people of the left who are crazy and shoot people. So this is feeding off some of the stuff that's going on here on the internet, which you know about all that anyway. Thing about this fear of death and the sort of pretense of sort of total chaos, which of course as soon as you leave the bubble you don't really see it, do you? Walk down your cul-de-sac and the guy's doing their lawn and somebody's fixing their motor, and people are walking around the shops perfectly civilized. But let's come back into this bubble we live in, where there is all this fear and chaos, and it's driving us into the kind of hands of these, I'm not going to call them governments, these kind of political cults. I mean, this is just obvious, isn't it? And it's always been the case that that these sort of totalitarian regimes have always used this fear and exploited paranoia in order to firm up their supporting base. So this is nothing new at all. There's a kind of liquid fear, all right, which can be directed into a lovely sort of pool of support for some of the most ridiculous people on the planet at the moment, who are leading us and basically getting us to hallucinate into a dream reality about stuff. Now, I'm not sounding like David Icke, but it's just true. If people believe things which simply aren't true, if people vote for their own destruction, then clearly that's a sort of madness. It's a sort of madness that you would get in a kind of extreme cult. The kind of extreme cults where they're happy to drink the lemonade which has got the poison in it, because that will mean that they will go to the planet, the planet Zata, and be and live eternal life. It's no different from that. I mean, we're just now completely cynical about everybody and everything. Okay, there used to be a time when things were contentious. In other words, where people would sort of be able to argue in a civil manner about a certain fact, but that's all gone by the wayside now. It's just sort of a deep cynicism, isn't it? And it's beyond cynicism. It's sort of turned into revulsion about the other party, and or some other group. It's very, very strange, in my opinion. But as I've said in many other videos, it's a kind of failing in the human psychology. We're easily exploited by being attracted to some idea viscerally rather than intelligently, and that's just the way we are. And there's this other thing, which is that we desperately want to see order out of what we feel is chaos. Now, most of these phenomena that are happening at the moment, which confuse us in some way, they are actually not chaotic as such. What they are is complex. And it doesn't help when you've got sort of people like Jordan Peterson who are obsessed with taking complex ideas and then sort of making them into kind of ordered ideas through very, in effect, sort of rather juvenile concepts like, like the Ten Commandments or the tale of Cain and Abel, and using or Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, which is a great book, but it's not a model for everything that ever happened in the world. He's all about this order and chaos idea. These are abstract ideas that he pretends are real, it's very infantile, to be honest, but it seems to appeal to people. And of course it appeals to people because people are, by and large, they have apophenia. Apophenia, which is they want to see order out of chaos. They want to see patterns that they understand in the world around them. The brain is not a particularly magical organ. It needs to understand the world in quite simplistic ways. But the world now is extremely complicated. We complicate it ourselves. We do that normally because somebody's taking advantage or exploiting those kind of fabricated complexities, making us feel fucking weird, and then telling us probably to buy something which will solve the weirdness. And then, he also talks about, well, they all talk about good and evil. Everything has to be good and evil now. It's no different from cowboys and Indians, is it? There's the good guy and the bad guy. The others are very, very dangerous. And of course, what's happening to confuse many people now, actually not confuse people, really disturb people, is the realization that actually we are the bad guys. I mean, you only have to look at what's going on in the world to realize that we, who kind of had been educated into thinking we're basically the good guys, are not the good guys. Our apathy towards what's happening in Palestine, for example, and many other things besides. I mean, imagine all this paranoia and fear being manipulated and turned into profit. I mean, that's basically what all the tech companies are doing, and then leeching on from that some of the worst of the sort of political movements, which take that and then they amplify those fears and paranoias until they're just a bubbling mass of resentments and cynicism, and then as the steam comes off as hatred. This is all being fabricated. It's all made up. None of it's real. Okay, there's absolutely no reason why two people, who have what used to be slightly differing views on things, can't rub along perfectly okay. And that's been going on for a very long time. But now, if you look on the YouTube thumbnails, probably you will see that we are at civil war. Democrats, for example, are murderous bastards that need to be sorted out. Good luck to you if you want a civil war. I mean, I guess it's fun having that personal racket, and it's sort of justifying your own misery and sort of blaming other people. But if the crunch ever came, maybe it won't be as pleasant as you thought. I mean, do you remember the early conspiracy theories? Do you remember how happy things were then? We rubbed along, Democrats and Republicans, and we kind of had a rough idea of where we were going. We wanted to be the future better than the past. This is before we did this. These new movements decided we needed strong men, when we needed cult movements, cultish movements, And do you remember, though, how wonderful it was? I mean, people like David Icke saying that the British royal family are lizards. It seems so innocent now, so cute. And David Icke, he's still going, but no one can hear him. He's now just living in a tiny apartment in the shadows on the Isle of Wight in southern England, and still talking about the reptilians have taken over and what have you. But of course, his wonderful innocence, his has been completely overshadowed by now a kind of large proportion of the culture, which have become pure conspiracy theorists in every direction, purely cynical, don't believe anything. And what they do believe is usually absolutely ridiculous and nutty. It doesn't, whether it be, the idea that, I'm not saying that people should be forced to take a vaccine, but the idea that vaccines in themselves are kind of like highly dangerous when they have been proved over 100 years to be incredibly successful on saving mankind, basically, it just is absolutely bizarre. 5G, we're happy to use it on the phone, but how great we feel when somebody tells us that 5G is some sort of government apparatus in order to kind of, stimulate the brain in a certain way, or chemtrails. You good friends of yours kind of fall into rabbit holes every day. Another one's gone, another one's gone. Yeah, I prefer it when it was David Icke and the royal family were reptiles, and like we didn't land on the moon and the Earth is flat. And that was only 10 years ago. That was 15 years ago. And now look at it. I mean, it's just completely exaggerated into an absolute madness now, whereas those things are just like kind of innocent little footnotes in the conspiracy history, and yet it wasn't long ago. Anyway, so what's the point of all this? Well, good point. Yeah, what is the point of all this? Well, probably isn't one, but I'll try and make one up. So when Dave said some things are worth dying for, and what he meant was a full life, I thought, can you imagine if you gave up all the fear and the paranoia and the feeling that everyone had it in for you, and the fact that the feeling that institutions were out to get you, and the paranoia you have about the neighbours, the guys down the road, the people across the street, because it's getting into every fibre in our body. What would happen if you let go of all that? Just let it go. It's very difficult because you've got this fear inside you. You walk outside your door, you walk up the street, you go into maybe kind of having to deal with some kind of authority, or, and you get this idea that somehow there's this kind of, everything's a conspiracy against you. What would happen if you let go of that? What would happen if you found, when you opened yourself up to the possibility of sort of being stabbed in the back by some unknown monster, you found that it didn't happen? What if you found there were no great conspiracies? What if you found that there was nothing really to fear? And that, you've been sort of trapped in an awful place for a long time, not from your own failings, but just through engaging with a culture that seems to, where fear and paranoia and stuff are predominant. Now, you'd have to take a risk, wouldn't you? You'd have to take a risk. You'd have to say, part of me feels that I'm under threat if I don't stop kicking off about this, that and the other, and, believing that certain people are out to get me, and that other people with political ideas have got some kind of agenda against me, or that the authorities want to take me down, or that the phone companies are listening in. If you relinquished all that, you are risking death, aren't you? If you're paranoid, you're risking attack, you're risking exploitation. But you never know. You might end up like Dave did, which is overcoming that fear in order to live a much more open and full life.